Alright, hello everyone. I hope you guys are doing good. So, today I'll be discussing the solutions to Codeforces round 762. This was a Division 3 round and it was held yesterday evening. Let's start by talking about the difficulty. This was somewhat more difficult than a typical Div 3 round, I would say. Problems A and B were easy, but starting from problem C, the difficulty level kind of increased. Like problem C was easy to think about, but it was implementation heavy, thus making it not so beginner friendly. And after that, problem D and E were also not very difficult, but they required some keen observations to be made. So yeah, that's about it. Definitely, it was definitely more difficult than a typical Div 3 round, right? So yeah, let's start by problem A. I'll be discussing the first 5 problems from A to E. So yeah, let's start with problem A. So this is a really easy problem. What we have to do here is that we have been provided with a string and we need to check whether S is a square string or not. And a string is called square if it is some string written twice. That's it. So we'll be provided with a string S and we need to tell whether it is the concatenation of whether it is the concatenation of one string twice or not. If it is, then we have to output yes, otherwise we have to output no. So yeah, pretty simple. What we can do here is, first of all, if the length of the string is odd, then answer will be no, obviously. And if the length of the string is even, then we just have to check if the first half is equal to the second half or not. If it is equal, then the answer will be yes, otherwise the answer will be no. So there is nothing much to this problem. There is nothing else to discuss here. So let's just have a look at the code. The implementation becomes really easy if we use the C++ substr function. So what we have to do here is, if n mod 2 is equal to 0, that is if n is even, and s dot substr 0 to n by 2 is equal to s dot substr n by 2. This denotes the first half and this denotes the second half. So if the first half is equal to the second half, then the answer will be yes. Otherwise the answer will just be no, right? Yeah, that pretty much sums it up. That's the solution to problem A. Let's move on to problem B now. Okay. So, in this problem, Polycarp likes squares and cubes of positive integers, and he has made a sequence, and the beginning of the sequence looks like this: 1, 4, 8, 9. So, for a given number n, we need to count the number of integers from 1 to n that Polycarp likes. Basically, what we have to do is, we have to find the number of such numbers x such that x is either a perfect square or a perfect cube, and x is less than equal to n, right? Again, this is not a very difficult problem to think about. Uh, Basically, we just need to count the number of perfect squares and perfect cubes less than equal to n, and that's about it, right? So we can just pre-compute all the perfect squares and perfect cubes in a vector, sort them out, and just when we'll be given with n, we just need to output the total number of numbers in our vector which are smaller than or equal to n, which can be easily found using binary search, right? So that's about it. That's all that we have to do in this problem. Just pre-compute all the perfect squares and perfect cubes, put them in a vector, sort the vector, and in every test case you will be given with an n. Use binary search to find the number of numbers in the vector which are less than or equal to n, and you are done. The only thing to care about here is that there can be numbers which are both perfect squares and perfect cubes. For example, 64. 64 is the square of 8 and it is also the cube of 4. So numbers like this might get inserted twice into your vector. So to avoid that, you can do a lot of things. Maybe first you can put all the numbers in a set and then you can form a vector using that set. Uh, Another thing that you can do is that you can use an ordered set and put all the numbers there, because an ordered set simply allows you to find out the order of a key and the number of numbers less than equal to a key. So that's also a good thing to do. But another easy way to do it is to insert every element just once. So what we can do is we can maintain a map of all the elements. The map will store true if an element is already inserted in the vector and false otherwise. So we will insert a number in the vector if and only if its map value is false. And once we insert a number, we will make its map value to be true. And that's it. Using this, we are making sure that we insert every number just once. So that's the solution to problem B. Let's just have a look at the code. Alright, so before even reading the input, I'm pre-computing all the values. So what I'm doing is I am iterating from 1 to 10 raised power 9. but obviously I am not iterating all the way, that would TLE. So once I get a situation where I square becomes greater than 10 raised to power 9, I am breaking out. The reason for that is that n in my test cases will never exceed 10 raised to power 9. And I'm also taking a map taken, where taken of I is true if I have already taken the number I. So if I have not taken I square, then I will insert I square into my vector. And if I have not taken I cube, then I will insert I cube into my vector, and I will do taken of I cube equals to true. Here I will do taken of I square equals to true. And right, then I will just sort the vector, and finally in the test case I will read n, and using upper bound I can easily find the total number of numbers in my vector which are less than or equal to n. So yeah, this is it. This is the solution to problem E done. Let's move on to problem C now. Alright, so again, this problem is not very difficult to think about, but the difficult part here is to actually implement it. Let's see what's happening here. So uh, we have an algorithm for addition of two numbers, and obviously this algorithm is not mathematically correct, but let's see what the algorithm is. So Tanya is learning how to add numbers, but so far she's not doing it correctly. So she's adding two numbers A and B using the following algorithm. So if one of the numbers is shorter than the other, then Tanya adds leading zeros to the numbers so that they become of the same length. This is good. This is okay. This is what you generally do. And now the numbers are processed in right to left. Again, this is good because this is what we generally do while adding two numbers. But this is where the problem comes. So in the first step, she adds the last digit of A to the last digit of B and writes their sum in the answer straight away. But in general addition, we don't do this, right? If the sum of the digits exceeds 10, if the sum of the digits exceeds 9, then we make some carryover, right? But here she is not doing any carryovers, and she is straight away writing that answer into her final result. And at each next step, she performs the same operation on each pair of digits in the same place and writes the result to the left side of the answer. So basically, she keeps repeating the step number 3, which is not a very good thing because it is incorrect, right? So in the input, we have been provided with two strings, two positive integers A and S, where S is the result and A is the first number, and we have to find out the second number, right? So we have to find out a B such that if we add A and B using the algorithm that Tanya is using, then we get S as a result. Okay, so yeah, this is the problem. I hope it is clear enough. Right, so let's see how we can solve this problem. So the first thing to do here is to obviously look digit by digit. So we will look digit by digit. But since we have two numbers, so first it makes sense to convert these numbers into strings because we are looking at their digits. Obviously there are various ways to do it. You can just keep dividing a number by 10 and take its remainder by 10. That way again you will get a digit. But the way I prefer to do it is to take these numbers as strings and then iterate on them digit by digit, right? So we will look digit by digit from right to left, obviously. Then what happens is, since we have two strings A and S, so since we have two strings A and S, it makes sense to keep two variables. We will keep two pointer variables. Right, so we will keep I and J, where I points to the last digit of A that we are currently looking at, and S points to the last digit of S that we are currently looking at, right? So let's say that these variables are I and J. Now, how exactly are we going about this two pointer approach? So we are looking at the ith digit of A and the jth digit of S, right? So what we mean is that S of I plus some number X is giving me, A of I plus some number X is giving me something, right? So that something can be anything. But the rightmost digit of that something is surely going to be S of J. Right, the rightmost digit of that something is going to be S of J. And another thing to notice here is that the sum of two numbers can never exceed like 18, right? The sum of two digits can never exceed 18. And so I know that this something lies between 0 to 18, but its rightmost digit is obviously s of j. That I know for sure. So let's just make two cases to make our life easier. So case 1, so let's say that, yeah, so this is case 1. Case 1 is when s of j is greater than a of I, is greater than or equals to a of I. So now if s of j is greater than or equals to a of I, it is fairly obvious that it is fairly obvious that the digit which was present in B at this location was and the sum of that digit with a of I is not exceeding 10, and we are having no carryovers. And the reason for that is simple, because if we have a digit n and we do a carryover, then we will be left with a digit which is strictly smaller than n, right? So in case 1, we can say that the digit at the corresponding position in B is nothing but s of j minus a of I. And once we do that, we know that we don't have to do anything else, so we will just do I minus minus and j minus minus, right? But let's look at case 2, which is more interesting. So it is that s of j is less than a of I, and this just simply means that there is a carryover. So all we can just say is that the digit at the corresponding position in B is this time not s of j minus a of I, it is s of j minus a of I plus 10. And the reason for that is simple, because there is a carryover, right? So the digit at the position will be s of j minus a of I, which will be negative. So we will add a 10 to it, and that will be it. So the digit at this corresponding position is like s of j minus a of I. But there is another thing here, and that thing is that if s of j minus 1 is not equal to 1, then our answer will be minus 1. The problem says that if no such b exists, then we also have to output minus 1. And it is fairly important to notice that if there is a carryover at position j, then s of j minus 1 has to be equal to 1, right? Because we can't carry over greater than 10. And always if we carry over, we will get a 1 to the left of my digit, right? So we need to make sure that s of j minus 1 is also equal to 1. And if that is the case, then the digit at the corresponding position in B is going to be s of j minus a of I plus 10. And in this case, we will do I minus minus and j minus equals to 2, right? So this is it. This is the entire two-pointer approach that we are going to follow. So if s of j is greater than equals to, so obviously, first of all, I will start I by a dot size minus 1 and j by s dot size minus 1. And this is the entire algorithm that I will use. And now let's just have a look at the code, which will surely give you a better clarity about this problem. So let's have a look at the code. Okay, so here we go. So we are keeping two pointer variables where j is equals to size of s minus 1, and I am iterating I from size of a minus 1 to 0. One thing is that if j is less than 0, that means I have already finished with my result, but I have not yet finished with a, which is a very impossible scenario. So in this case, the answer is going to be minus 1 for sure. Otherwise, if my j is not yet 0, I will look at the corresponding digits n1 and n2, where n1 is the digit at the corresponding position in A, and n2 is the digit at the corresponding position in S. So n1 is a of I minus 0, n2 is s of j minus 0. And then if n2 is greater than equals to n1, then I don't have to worry about anything. Then my result, which is the number digit at the corresponding position in B, will be just n2 minus n1, and I can simply just do j minus minus. Otherwise, I need to make sure that my j is greater than 0 and s of j minus 1 is also equal to 1, because if I carry over, then obviously the digit to the left will be 1, right? Because for example, if I'm doing 5 plus 6, then I'm getting 11, and so the digit to the left of 1 is 1. Similarly, if I'm doing 5 plus 9, I'm getting 14. Again, the digit has to be 1. So I need to make sure s of j minus 1 is 1 and j is greater than 0. If that's not the case, again answer will be minus 1. And this time result will be 10 plus n2 minus n1, and I will do j minus equals to 2. and I will form the corresponding character. I will start with 0 and I will add rest to it, and then I will just add this to my answer B, right? Again, another thing to notice is that we are going from right to left. That means we are constructing our answer from right to left. So finally, again, we'll have to reverse the answer as well. Alright, so once we are done with this 2-pointer, if we are not okay, then I will straight away output -1. But another very important implementation detail here is that if we have not yet finished with J, that means if we have not yet finished with our result, all that means is that we have finished with A, but we have not finished with S. And that means that there are just zeros in A, and I can just straight away append the corresponding digit in S to my answer. So what I'll do is, while j is still greater than equals to 0, I will just add s of j to my answer, and I will do j minus minus. And that's about it. An example of this situation can arise like this. So if my a is like 5, and let's say my s is 28. So in this situation, what happens is that my I is pointing to 5 and my j is pointing to 8. I realize that n2 is greater than equals to n1. So I simply append 3 to my answer, and then my I becomes less than 0. So I break out of this 2-pointer approach, but what I realize is my j is still greater than equals to 0, and my j is still pointing to this 2. So I know that I can just append a 0 here, and then the things will be good, right? So then what I'll do is I will just straight away append this 2 to my answer, and I will get 32, which I will then reverse, and it will become 23, right? Hope this makes sense. So yeah, also another thing to notice is that our answer cannot have leading zeros. So if I'm getting leading zeros, I will just pop them out, right? And then I will reverse my answer, and I will output my final answer. And that's about it. That completes the solution to problem C. I hope this makes sense to you guys. Yeah, this is it. Let's move forward with the next problem. Problem D. Okay. So about this problem, there are various approaches we can follow for this problem. Some people have also used binary search to solve this problem, which is right here in the tags as well. But my approach is a bit more intuitive, and the approach which I'm going to discuss is more intuitive, and it doesn't involve any binary search as well. So it's just based on 2 major observations that I made, and using those observations, this problem becomes really easy. But if you miss those observations, it can become really frustrating as well. So let's see what this problem is saying. Okay, so Vlad has n friends, and for each of whom he wants to buy one gift to the new year, for the new year. And for all those n friends, there are m shops in the city, and in each shop each shop has n gifts, right? Like for each shop, we know that if I buy a gift from this shop to a particular friend, for example, from the ith shop, if I buy a gift for the jth friend, then the amount of joy that the jth person will receive is Pij. And there is no restriction on the amount of gifts I can buy from any shop. I can buy any number of gifts from 0 to n. So it's my choice. It's totally my choice whether I want to not buy any gifts from a shop, or I want to buy all the gifts from that particular shop only. So that's totally up to me. But if I buy a gift for the jth friend from the ith shop, then the amount of joy that the jth friend receives is Pij units. And we have been provided with the entire Pij array in the input. Now comes the very interesting constraint, which is that Vlad has time to visit at most n-1 shops. That is, I cannot visit more than n-1 out of the m available shops. And it's totally up to me that which n-1 shops am I going to visit. I mean, I am allowed to visit less than n-1 shops, but not more than that. Right? So, what I need to tell is, I need to maximize the minimum value of the joy over all the friends, right? So I will buy one gift for each friend, and that particular gift will give a joy value to a friend. So let's say that the jth friend is receiving aj units of joy. Then I need to maximize the minimum value of a1, a2 up till an. It's kind of like a maxi-min problem. So there is a category of problems called the minimax problem or the maxi-min problem. So this is one of those problems. So I need to maximize the minimum value of joy that any friend will get. That's the problem. Yeah, it's I think I've explained the problem statement enough. the only constraint which I have here is that I can visit at most n minus 1 shops, and if I do that, I need to find out what is the maximum value of the minimum joy any friend will get. That is about it. Everything has been provided to me in the input. So let's see how we will solve this problem. So the first observation is that if there were no constraints on the number of shops that I can visit, then the optimal thing to do would have obviously been to just take the maximum amount of joy that I can get for every person. Then it would have been optimal to give every friend the gift which maximizes his or her joy. Right? Makes sense. But the only problem which might arise is that while doing this, I might visit more than n minus 1 shops, right? So while doing step 1, so let's say this is step 1. While doing step 1, if we visit more than n minus 1 shops, then it is not allowed. And this is the only case where I can go wrong, right? So if while doing what is written in step 1, I don't visit more than n minus 1 shops, then that is obviously the optimal way to do it, because I simply can't do anything better. I am giving the maximum possible joy that I can to everyone, and so I will just take the minimum out of all those maximum values, right? So what I'll do is that I will create an array where max val of I stores the maximum possible value of pji over all j, right? So what that means is I'll go over all the j shops, all the m shops, and like j goes from 1 to m, and I will take the maximum value of pji, and that will be the max val of I. So it's the maximum possible value of pji, that is the maximum possible joy that the ith friend can get. So while doing this, if I visit not more than n minus 1 shops, then I'm good. But if I do visit more than n minus 1 shops, that is going to be a problem. But the main observation is that I can't visit more than n shops, right? Even if everyone has a distinct shop from where he or she is getting his or her maximum joy, even then I will visit just n shops, right? I can't visit more than n minus 1 shops. And that is a crucial piece of information. And now let's see the main observation here. Well, there is a very famous principle in mathematics which is called the pigeonhole principle. And according to the pigeonhole principle, if I talk about it in a nutshell, it basically means if I have n pigeons and I have n minus 1 holes, and I have to put every pigeon in a hole, then there will be at least one hole which will contain more than one pigeon, right? So if you didn't get what I'm trying to say, just ignore it. But I'm going to make use of the pigeonhole principle, and which is, since there are n friends and at max n minus 1 shops to be visited, there will be at least one shop from where I will buy greater than or equals to 2 gifts. And this is a very necessary thing, because if from each shop I buy just one gift, then I will end up visiting n shops, right? Which is not allowed. So there has to be at least one shop from where I will buy greater than equals to 2 gifts, and this is an argument by the pigeonhole principle. If you don't know what the pigeonhole principle is, then again it is a very easy thing to observe here. Since I am allowed to visit at max n minus 1 shops, if I just take one gift from every shop, then I will end up visiting n shops, right? So I have to take 2 gifts from at least one shop. Like, I have to take multiple gifts, that is greater than 1 gifts, from at least one shop, right? And so what I can do is that I can iterate on which shop I am taking greater than equals to 2 gifts from. So once I take greater than equals to 2 gifts from a shop, I am no longer restricted. And the reason for that is that if I'm taking 2 gifts from shop 1 and all the other gifts are being taken from unique shops, even then at max I will end up visiting n minus 1 shops. So if we take 2 gifts from shop 1 and take the rest of the gifts from unique shops, we would still end up visiting n minus 1 shops. And we can't do greater than that. We can't visit n shops if we are taking greater than equals to 2 gifts from a shop. And all that means is that once I have fixed a shop from where I am taking greater than equals to 2 gifts, I am no longer restricted. For all the other people, I can just take their maximum, their max val, right? I have already calculated max vals. So yeah, that's about it. So now let's come to the solution. Using all these observations, I can come to a very simple solution. So iterate on the shop from where you will be taking greater than equals to 2 gifts. Now another important thing is that if we are taking greater than or equals to 2 gifts from a shop, it makes sense to take those 2 gifts which give the maximum possible joy, right? Like obviously there is no reason, there is no thing which is stopping me from doing that. So once we are iterating it, so if we are at shop I, we will take the 2 gifts which have the highest joy value. And once we have done that, there will be 2 people, there will be 2 persons, let's say person 1 and person 2, who will be the second highest and the highest in the shop I, right? So other than the person 1 and person 2, for all the other persons, there are n persons. So for all the other persons, we can just take their maximums, right? So if person 1 and person 2 have the highest and second highest joy value in shop 1, in shop I, then obviously we have already purchased a gift for these 2 people. The reason for that is I'm already taking the 2 gifts with the highest and second highest joy value in the ith shop. So that means I have already purchased a gift for these 2 people. But then I can take the greatest, I can take the gift with the greatest joy value for every other person, and that joy value is nothing but max val of the person, right? So this is the entire solution. You just iterate on which shop you are taking greater than equals to 2 gifts. You just take the two highest gifts, the highest and the second highest, and there will be 2 corresponding people whose gifts you have already purchased, and for the remaining n minus 2 people, you can just take their maximum possible, because even if you take their maximum possible, you will end up visiting at max n minus 1 shops. You can't visit more than n minus 1 shops, which is pretty clear from this point, right? So that's about it. That's the solution here. So yeah, this is it. But this is one way of writing down the solution. But it turns out to make the implementation simple, the same solution can be written in very different terms. So the answer is going to be the minimum of 2 values. Let's say val1 and val2. Alright, so what will be val1? So you are iterating on shops and you are taking the second highest and the highest, right? Again, remember that we need to maximize the minimum value. So out of the highest and the second highest, the minimum is going to be second highest. And it also makes sense to choose that shop as your shop where you will be taking greater than equals to 2 gifts, which maximizes your second maximum, right? So val1 will be the maximum value among all shops of the gift which is the second greatest in the shop. That is, if we sort all PIs, then val1 is equals to maximum value of P1 n minus 1, P2 n minus 1 up till Pm n minus 1. N minus 1, why? Because I have sorted all the PIs, and every PI has n elements, so the second highest is going to be at the position n minus 1. So this is going to be val1, and obviously it makes sense to choose the shop which will maximize my PI n minus 1. So out of all the PIs, I will just take the maximum value of PI n minus 1. And what will be val2? Again, since I am fixing the shop from which I am taking the two maximums, for all the other persons other than person 1 and person 2, I know that I am free to choose their maximum values. So val2 will be, and again, out of all those maximums, I need the minimum, right? So val2 will be the minimum among all max val I. So val2 is equals to minimum of max val1, max val2 up till max val n. So I'm just writing down the same solution in a different manner such that the implementation becomes easier. So final answer is just going to be minimum of val1 and val2. So just to reiterate, what I'm doing is, first of all, I'm choosing a shop which will maximize my second maximum, right? So I'm taking the maximum value of the second maximum among each shops. And so once I have fixed my shop, I know that I have already purchased the gifts for 2 people, but for the remaining n minus 2 people, I am free to use their maximum values as my gift, right? So I will just take the maximum value of all the remaining n minus 2 people, but I can also include those 2 people because it doesn't matter, because the gift which I have already purchased for them will be less than equal to their maximum value, right? So even if I include that in my val2, that's not going to change anything. So val2 will be the minimum among all the max val I. And once I've calculated val1 and val2, my answer is going to be minimum of val1 and val2, since I need the minimum value of all the AIs. And if I do this, I will surely get the maximum of the minimum value of all AIs. Again, this might be a bit confusing, but once you wrap your head around it, it seems not very difficult. I do agree that there have been a lot of observations in this problem, but if you just give 10-15 minutes of concentrated thought to this problem, I'm sure that you will get what I'm trying to say here. So this pretty much sums it up. This is the entire solution. Let's have a look at the code now. Okay. So what I'm doing is I am first of all taking Pij as an input, and then I am calculating max val of j for all j's. And once done, I am taking the minimum among all the max vals. So I have my val1 here calculated. Then if m is less than equals to n minus 1, my answer is just going to be the answer. That's again a very obvious thing. But if that's not the case, first of all, I'm going to sort all the PIs, and then I will take the maximum value of PI n minus 1, and that will be my val2. And my answer is going to be minimum of val1 and val2. That's it. That's the entire code. Very short and crisp code, but there is a very rigorous analysis behind this approach. That's all behind the scenes, but the code looks pretty clean here. Okay, that's it for problem D. Moving on to the last problem that we'll be discussing today, problem E. Okay, so let's see. So Dimitri has an array of n non-negative integers a1 up till an. In one operation, we can choose any index and increase the value of the element at that index by 1. It's important to notice here that we can only increase the value and not decrease it. We are allowed to choose the same index j multiple times. That's okay. So for each I from 0 to n, we need to determine whether Dimitri can make the max of the array equal to exactly I. So if it is possible, then we also have to determine the minimum number of operations to do it. And the max of an array is equal to the minimum non-negative integer that is not in the array. Right? So that's it. This is the max of an array. We already know it's a very standard term in competitive programming. So the max of an array is the minimum non-negative integer which is not present in the array. So the max of 3, 0, 1 is 2 because 0 and 1 are already present, and 2 is the minimum non-negative integer which is not present, right? I hope it's clear. Now, for each I from 0 to n, we need to tell whether by doing some operations, we will be able to make the max equal to I or not, right? So let's see how to solve this. So for each I, we need to tell whether we can make the max of the array equal to I by only incrementing some numbers, right? Okay, cool. Let's see. So, what does it mean to make the max equal to I? So, conditions for max equal to I. So, if we are making max equal to I, we need at least one occurrence of all numbers from 0, 1, 2 up till I minus 1. So this is the first condition. But the second condition is that we need no occurrence of the number I. And if these two conditions are satisfied, then surely the max is going to be I. We don't need anything else. The only condition for max to be equal to I is that we have at least one occurrence of all the numbers from 0 to I minus 1, and there is no occurrence of the number I. Also notice that this second condition is very easy to handle, and the reason for that is that I can increment numbers, right? So I can just increment all the occurrences of I that I have, and if I do that, I will be left with no occurrence of I. So this second condition is not a problem for me. I can always make this condition to be true. The only condition which can be false is this first condition, which is that I need at least one occurrence of all the numbers from 0, 1, 2 up till I minus 1. Right. So, what I will do is that I will look at it in a very different manner. I will look at it like this. So, for max to be equal to I, also I will just ignore the second condition for now, because we can always just remove all the occurrences of I. So, for max to be equal to I, we need to make all numbers from 0 to I minus 1. That's it. The second condition will be satisfied. We can just add the counts of I to our answer, because for each count of I, we will have to increment it by 1. That's very secondary, so I am ignoring it for now. So for max to be equal to I, we need to make all numbers from 0 to I minus 1, right? And by making a number, what I mean is that I will do zero or more operations on some number and make a number. So I need to make every number from 0 to I minus 1 by doing 0 or more operations on some number. So by doing 0 or more operations on the existing number, right? Okay, but how do I make a number? So since I need to minimize the number of operations, right, now notice that I need to minimize the number of operations, and so to make a number j, it makes sense to use the largest number which is less than equal to j that we have available. So we will use that number, do some operations on it and convert it to j. So since we need to minimize the number of operations, to make a number j, we will use the largest number greater than less than equal to j, let it be k, and add j minus k to the answer, right? So we will just follow this procedure for all the numbers from 0 to I minus 1, and then we will just add the count of I to our answer, so that I have removed all the occurrences of I, and that's it. That's my answer for I. But if I don't get any number which is less than equals to j, and so yeah, if I don't have any available number which is less than equals to j for any j from 0 to I minus 1, then I can just say that the answer for that particular index is going to be minus 1, right? And also for all the other indexes, the answer is going to be minus 1. This is a very noticeable thing even from the test cases. The non-zero answers form a prefix, and the non-minus 1 answers form a prefix, and all the minus 1s form a suffix. And that is a very fairly intuitive observation. The reason for that is that if I can form a max of I, if I cannot form a max of I, then I cannot form a max of I plus 1 as well. And the reason for that is that if I can't form a max of I, then the only reason for that could have been that I can't satisfy this first condition, right? Because I can always satisfy the second condition. So if I cannot satisfy this first condition for I, then I can't satisfy this first condition for I plus 1 as well. Why? Because for max equals to I, the first condition is that I need at least one occurrence of all numbers from 0 to I minus 1. And for max equals to I plus 1, the first condition translates to that I need at least one occurrence of all the numbers from 0 to I. So if I can't have at least one occurrence of all numbers from 0 to I minus 1, then I obviously can't have at least one occurrence of all the numbers from 0 to I. So that clears things up, that the answer, once I get a minus 1, all the other answers are just going to be minus 1s. Okay. So with that clear, I have a very greedy and correct algorithm with me. That is, for all the elements from 0 to I minus 1, I will try to find out the closest element which is less than equal to that and convert that element to j. So for all j from 0 to I minus 1, find a k which is closest to j and is less than equals to j, and convert k to j and add j minus k to my answer. That is all well and good, but the only problem is that the constraints are huge, and if we want to answer for all the elements from 0 to n, we can't just make use of this algorithm, because obviously this is O of n square, right? So what to do? So in this case, to speed up, we will use dynamic programming. So let dp of I denote the minimum number of operations to achieve max equals to I. And the goal for us is to calculate dp of I using the help of dp of I minus 1. So let's see what dp of I will be. So dp of I will be, in dp of I, what we will do is that we will make 0, 1, 2, 3 up till I minus 2, I minus 3, I minus 2, and I minus 1. This is one step, and then we will remove all occurrences of I, right? If we do that, we will make the max equals to I, because we will make all the elements from 0 to I minus 1. Making an element means incorporating at least one occurrence of that element. So we will make all the elements from 0 to I minus 1 such that we have at least one occurrence of all those elements, and then we will remove all the i's that we have. Okay, and let's see what dp of I minus 1 is, and try to find out any overlapping things in dp of I and dp of I minus 1. So in dp of I minus 1, we will make again 0, 1, 2, 3, I minus 3, I minus 2, but not I minus 1. Right? This time we are not making I minus 1, and we will remove I minus 1s. Right? So what you notice is that this part is common in dp of I minus 1 and dp of I. Right? This part is common in dp of I minus 1 and dp of I. So, how to construct dp of I from dp of I minus 1? We know that this particular part is common. So, what we will do here is that we can actually find out this part pretty easily because we already have dp of I minus 1 with me. So from dp of I minus 1, if I subtract the total number of operations which I am doing to achieve this part, that is remove all the I minus 1s, then I will be left with this common part, right? So common part is equals to dp of I minus 1 minus the number of operations required to remove all the I minus 1s, and that is nothing but the count of I minus 1. Count of I denotes the total number of occurrences of I. So the common part is dp of I minus 1 minus count of I minus 1. So once I have removed count of I minus 1s, I am left with the common part. Great. Now dp of I is equal to common part plus making I minus 1 plus removing i's, right? Okay, so a common part I know using dp of I minus 1. Removing i's is simple, it is just count of I. I will just increment all the i's by 1, and that will take one operation for each occurrence of I. So removing i's will be just count of I. Now the only challenge which I have left is making I minus 1. So dp of I is common part, which is dp of I minus 1 minus count of I minus 1 plus removing i's, which is count of I, plus making I minus 1. So now I have to make I minus 1. And to do that, what I can do is that I can maintain a multi-set of available numbers. So I can maintain a multi-set of available numbers and use lower bound or maybe upper bound to find out the closest available number to I minus 1 which is less than equal to I minus 1. Let's say that this number is j. So if this number is j, then I will add I minus 1 minus j to my answer. And then I will remove j from the multiset. Right? So this pretty much sums it up. This last step was pretty crucial to think about maintaining this multiset of available numbers. So I will maintain this multiset of available numbers, and I have already mentioned here that it is optimal to take the closest number to j, and that number should be less than equal to j as well. So here my j is I minus 1. So I will take the closest number from the multiset, which is less than equal to I minus 1, and it is closest to I minus 1, and then I will add I minus 1 minus j to my answer, and then I will just remove j from my multiset. And if I find out that the multiset doesn't contain any such number, then the answer will obviously be minus 1, and for the remaining all the other indices, the answer is going to be minus 1 only, right? So this pretty much sums it up, problem E. Again, it was a problem which required us to make some keen observations, and hence it was a bit difficult. So let's have a look at the code now. Right, so I'm maintaining a multiset of available numbers. Initially, I'm inserting all the numbers in my multiset. I'm also maintaining the counts in the vector count. And then I'm creating an answer vector, which is nothing but the DP values. And answer of 0 will just be count of 0. That's a pretty intuitive thing because I just have to remove all the zeros to make max equals to 0. And from 1 to n, I will be using DP. First of all, answer of I is equals to answer of I minus 1 minus count of I minus 1. And this is just the common part. And now this is just removing I, and now in the middle I am trying to figure out what is the number of operations which will be required to make I minus 1, right? So making I minus 1. To do that, first of all I'm finding the upper bound of I minus 1 in my multiset, and if that upper bound is equal to set dot begin, meaning that there is no element less than equal to I minus 1 in my multiset, then for all the remaining indices the answer is going to be minus 1, and I can just break out. Otherwise I will do it minus minus to find out the closest element which is less than equal to I minus 1, and I will just do this element will be j, and I will just do I minus 1 minus j, that is I minus 1 minus star it to my answer. So that's it. I will first of all add common part, then I will add the number of operations to remove I, and then I will add the number of operations to make I minus 1. And That can be done using my multiset. And finally, I will also erase IT from my multiset because it is no more available to me. And yeah, that is it. Then I will just output all the answers. So this is it for problem E, and this is all that I had in mind today. So thank you so much for watching till the end. I will see you in the next video.